Okay, hello. Welcome to the next Dreamland tutorial. Subject of this tutorial is about mixing, something which I call multiple perspective mixing. I think that in order to do a perfect mix, you have to mix from multiple perspectives and switch perspectives regularly during composing and mixing process. That's what I'm doing at least. This tutorial is also about various tools for mixing and analyzing, which I call magnifying glasses. I am using magnifying glasses in combination with reference tracks, which I've explained in previous tutorial. I am using the following magnifying glasses, which are all in master channel and most mapped to keyboard shortcuts. Most of these tools are disabled when exporting audio. So, the magnifying glasses is a thing I'm calling SMLR rack, stereo mono left right rack. And you can see it here in my Ableton Live project. And you see in the rack, it's just a Ableton Live audio effect rack. There is 5 channels. First one is stereo signal. The second one is mono or pseudo-mono, which means that mono signal comes to both speakers. The next one is left pseudo, which means that the left signal is coming to both speakers. The next one is right pseudo, right signal coming to both speakers. And the last one is silence. The next tool I'm using is output rotation. And typically it means inside Ableton that here in lower corner you see where my mouse is, there is an output selector. Number 1 and number 2 is output to studio monitors. Number 3 and number 4 are outputs to auxiliary speakers, which I have here on the picture. For me, auxiliary speakers are just Creative Inspire T11 speakers, very cheap speakers, but that's the ones I'm using. The next magnifying glass is a low-pass filter. I think, was it this? No, this is high-pass. A low-pass filter. I've explained a little bit already on the previous tutorial, but it is one of the magnifying glasses I'm using. And also I have a high-pass filter as a magnifying glass. And then another magnifying glass is acoustic correction, which for me is Sonarworks, but it could be something else. Then another tool I could have as a magnifying glass is a reverb on master channel, which is disabled when exporting audio. And then I have, of course, a couple of visual analyzers like an oscilloscope, which is Exoscope plugin, and a spectrum analyzer is this one. So what I'm doing during mixing is rotations. And you see here a slide where I'm trying to demonstrate what I mean. So during mixing, I am rotating all the time, doing SMLR, stereo, mono, left, right, again and again and again. And rotation 2 is I'm rotating outputs, mostly between studio monitors and auxiliary speakers. But sometimes also I'm switching to headphones and sometimes even to secondary headphones when I have some critical mixing decision to do, like, for example, choosing a snare sample. During lifetime of a tune from beginning to the end, I'm switching between speakers hundreds of times, between studio monitors, aux speakers and headphones. Rotation 3, you see here, acoustic correction, changing it on and off and on and off. Typically I'm doing this only when studio monitors are enabled. If you are using acoustic correction like Sonarworks, remember that do not use acoustic correction intended for studio monitors in a different output like your auxiliary speakers or headphones. Otherwise you will get a wrong frequency response curve. Acoustic correction fixes your room modes like dips and peaks in your frequency response. But The acoustic correction modifies transients. In my opinion, transients sound a little bit different through acoustic corrections. So that's why I don't have it all the time enabled. I have acoustic correction maybe 65% of the time enabled and 35% of the time disabled. In my case, I'm using Sonarworks as an acoustic correction, but there are other solutions available as well. For example, some Genelex speaker models have an internal acoustic correction. Most important tool by far, which I'm using in mixing and even while arranging, is the SMLR rack. And I have a keyboard shortcut, key C, mapped to chain select of SMLR rack. So here, once again, you see that the chain selector here, well, if I show here keyboard shortcuts, for me it's like minimum 0, maximum value 4, and key C just changes between the values. Every time I press key C, it changes between all of these chains. During mixing, I am constantly hitting key C and changing the SML rack to a different position. Most of the time, I'm listening to either mono, left or right. Only 25 to 30% of time I'm arranging or mixing, I'm actually listening in stereo. So I will demonstrate you how I will use this. I just play a loop, and first you hear it on stereo, then on mono, then left, right and silence. Now in mono. Left. Right. And silence. And again, stereo. So, what I'm doing, I'm just pressing C again and again and again, and it goes around and around, rotate. It is easy to lose track which chain is actually selected in the rack. And if you do so, just keep switching track with the keyboard shortcut until you hear silence. And then you will know that the next time you press the keyboard shortcut, you are hearing stereo again. Okay, so why is it so important to listen in mono or only left or only right channel? I'm using Ozora Festival as an example because I've spent hundreds of hours of time on the dance floor and it is a very familiar environment for me. Here you see a map, a satellite image from Ozora area. And these are, of course, approximate. I don't know if the speakers are exactly where I've pointed them. Left speakers are around here. I mean, left from audience perspective, of course, it's reverse for artist. And right speaker is here and they're pointing downwards. So all of you who've been to Ozora know it's a huge dance floor. There are thousands of people dancing at the same time when it's full. And in the dance floor, in my opinion, the green areas here, you see the green circles, are the only places where you really have some sort of stereo image. Both of the speakers are like really far on your both side. So you have some sort of stereo image and your listening experience might remind most of your listening experience inside your studio. But then if you look at the red areas here in front of the left speaker or in front of the right speaker, there are hundreds or even thousands of people dancing on these areas. And on these areas, people are hearing mainly only the left or only the right channel of your tune. They will not be hearing all the delicate stereo effects or stereo positioning you've made. They are mainly hearing only the left or only the right. So if you use stereo effects or stereo positioning to separate sounds, this separation will mostly affect only the listeners that are in the green areas, which are a relatively small portion of the whole dance floor. The farther you go from the center towards the side, the more you will hear masking if it is present in your tune. Also, in indoor venues, wall and roof reflections can reduce stereo effects or positioning and make masking more obvious. In extreme scenarios, it is possible that your listener is hearing only left or only right for very long time periods. Again, here on the red zones on the dance floor, I've seen people for hours dancing and staying there. They could be for duration of your whole set, be there on the side, and they will not even know how it would sound in the middle. All your delicate stereo positioning and mixing do not matter to them, and they will not hear your music as you might have intended them to do. Okay, so then see the purple section here on the map. A very long section. There is also a large amount of people in this region, but at such long distance there is barely any stereo image. Audio from right and left speakers will sum or superpose, and listeners' perception of the sound is closer to mono than stereo. Other real-life situations where left, right or mono also become important. Number 1. Somewhere between the audio source and sound system there is a malfunctioning audio cable, and sound engineer or artist has to put either left, right or mono signal to both speakers. This happens also in home settings. Number 2, somebody has accidentally set mixer to mono and nobody notices. Number 3, left or right speaker simply does not work or gets broken during the event. Believe me, these things happen much more often than you'd think. Reality is, of course, more complicated than visualized on this map, and I'm not really a sound system engineer. But I think it is pretty safe to say that if you really truly think about the experience of your listeners, you should compose your music in such a way that it will also sound good if listened in mono or only left or only right. So, when you listen in mono or left or right, masking becomes much more obvious and it is much easier to solve masking issues. If you mix with headphones, it is even more important to monitor mono, left or right, because when mixing with headphones, masking is even less obvious. Typical mistakes which you can do when mixing with headphones is that you put pad and reverbs so loud that they will mask and hide a lot of other stuff, but it is not really obvious when listening in headphones. Number 2. High frequencies of kick or snare are so loud that they will mask everything else, and even more so if the tune is played in a room with very strong echo. I used to mix before only in mono and stereo, but I don't do that anymore. Because if you have very wide sounds, like many patches on ReFX Nexus, which I'm also using, or you have some stereo effects like chorus or haze effect, I don't know how you pronounce it, HAAS effect, the sound could be much quieter on mono than it is on the sides. The sound might mask other sounds on left or right, which on worst case scenario you will find out when listening to your tune on dance floor. If you listen to only left or only right in your studio, you will notice the masking and you can fix it. Okay, so let's go back to Ozora map. So here is still orange regions, which I still didn't explain. On these areas there are also quite a lot of people spending time, but obstacles are blocking most of high and mid frequencies from the speakers. This is one of the reasons I have a low-pass filter on master channel. If I want to check out how these people would perceive my tune, I'll enable the low-pass filter and figure out if there is anything I could do to improve their experience. If you have an interesting low end, they will enjoy more and perhaps come to the dance floor. Also, I've had a couple of situations where bassline had a little bit of weak low end, but I didn't notice this until I turned on the low-pass filter. So in this situation, the low-pass filter functioned as a magnifying glass so that I could more clearly hear that there is issue in the low end and concentrate only in the low end. One thing to remember though, if your tune is to be mastered for distribution to DJ-oriented shops like Beatport, Juno Download, whatever, the label might want a loud master because of loudness wars. And if you have made a really delicate dynamic low end, after mastering it could sound very different and probably less dynamic than in your mix. Okay, so reverb as a magnifying glass. Here I don't now have the reverb, but sometimes I have a reverb on master channel, and typically it is also disabled, and it's definitely not on while exporting. The purpose of this reverb is to simulate how your tune survives the echo of an indoor venue. Best for this purpose would be to use an impulse reverb and impulses of typical indoor venues where you might be playing. But to be honest, I've been using just a normal Ableton Live reverb, even for this purpose. This reverb can, for example, reveal if your arrangement is so busy that its element will not be well audible in an echo listening environment. It can also bring too bright kick or snare more obvious. Okay, so when your tune gets close to completion, it is worth to export the tune and listen it even on more sound systems, especially in a car and, for example, portable Bluetooth speakers. Once again, there could still be issues in your mix that are not obvious with all the tools described until now, but when you listen it in another setting, you will spot the issues. During the final stages of my last Dreamland album, I exported the tunes and ran to the parking lot 50 to 100 times to listen in a car. This process took a couple of days, but I'm glad that I did it, because more issues were revealed in the car, like loud hi-hats masking other sounds, which I just didn't notice in my studio. Okay, so Highpass Filter, another magnifying glass. I'm not using it very often, but for example, enabling it and then comparing to your reference tracks can make it more obvious what is different in the high end of your track and the reference track, or if your high end is just boring. I know that my high ends have room for improvement, and in the future I want to make them more interesting and dynamic. Then, another magnifying glass, side channel. I used to have side channel as one of the chains in the SMLR rack, but I'm barely using it anymore in mixing. But when comparing stereo width of your tracks and reference tracks, it can be a useful tool. You can create representation of the side channel by doing an audio effect rack with two chains, where one has mono utility with 0% width and other has left and right channels inverted. In Ableton Live version 9 or older, you could create a side channel representation by setting width of the utility to 200%, but since Live 10 utility effect algorithm has changed and values over 100% have a different algorithm. Visual analyzers. I have also some visual analyzers on the master, like oscilloscope and spectrum analyzer, but they are outside the scope of this tutorial. Summary. If your music is intended for the dance floor, then only a small percentage of the audience will hear a good stereo image and good frequency response. The rest will hear other representations of your tune with less or even virtually no stereo image, and some of them with highs and mids blocked by obstacles. So that's about multiple perspective mixing and magnifying glasses. If you like this tutorial, please share, follow and support in the links in the description. You can also mention my productions to your local promoter, as I'm always searching for more jigs. Thank you and have a nice day.